Mirëmbrëma, sonte në pik i ftuar është Dr. Florian Biber, është një prej studiuesve më të njohur të Ballkanit Perëndimor, profesor shkrimtar, po ashtu hulumtues i cili gjendet pothuajse në formë të shpeshtë në Ballkan Perëndimor duke analizuar të gjitha veprimet. Florian, welcome to Peak.
Thank you for having me.
We know each other for quite some time, almost 30 years. You are a professor, you are a researcher, you are an author of many books, and you've coined certain phrases that have entered the mainstream. But as a man who was in the Balkans for such a long time, you're probably a clairvoyant by now. In the tradition of Baba Vanga and all these clairvoyants of the Western Balkans, why don't we start with the history of the future? And so we are now in 2030. We look back and we see what?
You're asking a difficult question because, academics are usually terrible clairvoyants. But if we're in 2030 and we look back, I would say I'd like to think in scenarios, in at least more than one way. But let's say one reality could.
Let's take two.
Let's take two. Let's take one reality where we are in a world where there are fewer democracies than 5 years ago. There are more conflicts. There's a real crisis of democracy, and some democracies have fallen in the European Union. And some powers took the time, the interregnum, this period of uncertainty, to change borders, to settle, challenge the peace order we've seen established after the wars of the 90s in the Balkans. And we have an America which is an authoritarian state and promoting these ideas worldwide. I think that is one scenario. The other one is that I would say the scenario that the decline of democracy in America stopped, or at least it mobilized sources of democracy in Europe. Just like Brexit stopped anybody from trying to leave the European Union because it was such a horrific example that people realized that voting for anti-democratic authoritarian parties is destructive. Europe finds a purpose and an urgency to unite and to bring countries in, and that by 2030 we have resolved the open questions in the region, and we have 3 new members in the European Union: Albania, Montenegro, and North Macedonia. And Serbia and Kosovo and Bosnia are negotiating and might join the European Union in the coming years. So I think there are 2 futures.
Do they coincide? Is there a point where they get? I mean, when is the point when we look back from 2030 that one scenario overcame the other? How did we go from? I mean, the trend of diminishing democracies is not new.
No.
It is the trend of the century. Actually, we have, by any count, we have a recession in terms of democracies in the 21st century. So it has not started with Trump. It started much earlier, right? And the insecurity in Europe is not new either. We happen to recognize it in 2022. But if you ask the Georgians, it started in 2007, and the Moldovans and the Ukrainians in 2014. So this is the century of both decline in democracy and decline in security. At what point do we change from a downward spiral into a upward spiral?
Well, I mean, I think the you're absolutely right that the decline has been lasting for a good 2 decades or decade and a half. But of course, now we're seeing the effect of a decline, meaning that the number of democracies is more drastically declining, but also we see a decline within established democracy. And I think this is why Trump is fundamentally different. I mean, if you ask any scholar in political science, they would say one of the golden rules is established democracies, wealthy, prosperous, established democracies don't decline or don't become authoritarian. And that rule has been, thrown or at least challenged seriously. So it's a much more serious challenge than a country like Turkey becoming authoritarian or a country which, like Russia, becoming more authoritarian under Putin. So the question is really, what are those turning points to go in the other direction? I don't believe that the decline of democracy is either permanent or inevitable. I think just like in after 1989, we said the rise of democracy is inevitable. We risk now of saying the opposite: the rise of autocrats is inevitable, and that's just not true. And when people talked about the waves of democracy, they were saying the wave of democracy which came to Eastern Europe, Central Europe in 1989 began in Portugal in 1974. Now, if you were in 1974 now, and you would look at the map of Europe, Spain is a dictatorship, Portugal is a dictatorship, Greece is a dictatorship, not to mention countries under Soviet dominance, you probably wouldn't have noticed the change of power in Portugal as a turning point. So we don't know when the turning point is, because it might be a protest in some country, be it Georgia, maybe successful, or Serbia, or other countries, which we don't even see yet as being significant, but in 20 years, people might say, well, this is when things started going in the other direction. And it's probably not going to be in the big countries. It's going to be somewhere small and then gradually gaining momentum. So I think the question is of course, when we're thinking ourselves as being in 2030 or in this period, is that America, of course, has a huge power of persuasion around the world, and that has been a positive force for many decades. But of course, it can be turned into a negative one. It can be a model for autocrats to justify. We already see it, that autocrats are cracking down on Democrats because or under the shadow of Trump. And
Well, let me dispute that argument because, President Vučić did not need Trump to engage in what he has been engaging in the last 12 years. So, or any other autocracies, Orban in Hungary has been successful under President Biden, President Obama, and what have you. So I don't actually buy that argument. I mean, it has logic to it, but you said positive and negative in terms of American influence. What if we put a third way, which is neutral, actually? So if we have American nationalism, which is probably we're in 2030 and we have turned back and say, well, 2025 marks what is an American nationalism, protecting make America great again, trying to get some territories as Greenland, and trying to say to the Europeans, look, we're not going to pay for your security, so you're basically on your own, or we sign a new contract, which is what is happening right now in 2025. So what if the Trump effect is about telling the Europeans, why don't you forge your identity? Because this is not transatlantic anymore. It's basically you Europeans trying to manage your own affairs. Kind of a European nationalism.
well, I don't think he wants that. I mean, I think that's a difference. I mean, I think the first Trump administration was one about disengagement, and the message was, we don't want to pay your bills. You're on your own. But what we're seeing now is, I mean, an active attack on the idea of European integration. I mean, people like Vice President J.D. Vance openly attacked the idea of European integration and took the side, together with people like Elon Musk, took the side of the far right. So they're not just saying you're on your own. It's not an isolationist agenda anymore. And I think this is what people were expecting when Trump came to power for the second term, that we're going to have an isolationist America. But actually, that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing actually one which is more imperial in its ambition. I mean, territorial claims to Canada and Greenland and Panama, are no longer jokes. And these are serious claims. Now, of course, they might never materialize because of the nature of the government in the US. But that suggests that it's not just about disengagement. It's actually about actively threatening these allies. And we see this in Europe, the support for parties which are populist authoritarian. So in a certain way, Trump wants to, and people around him want to promote a similar model elsewhere. So in a certain way, it's taking the American promotion of its own way of organizing itself in the direction as Trump is trying to reorganize America. So I think that's why it's much more of a threat to Europe. Now, Europeans might, and I think we see the support for the EU is at an all-time high in surveys, that Europeans might find greater sense of unity because one is threatened. I mean, nothing works better than a threat for having a common identity.